For a long time, nationalism has been perceived by the elites in the Western world as a moral problem. The modern world, it's been said, should focus on openness, globalism, and cultural diversity. But things are changing. Nationalism has made its return in politics, but also in political thought. And I'm very happy to have Yoram Hazony here, who is an Israeli philosopher, Bible scholar, political theorist, and chairman of the Edmund Burke Foundation. Welcome to RIX, Mr. Hazony.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. In 2018, you published a book entitled The Virtue of Nationalism. What is the virtue or the virtues of nationalism?
Well, let's begin with what is nationalism.
Yep.
Nationalism is a principled political standpoint that regards the world as governed best when nations are permitted the freedom to govern themselves according to their own independent traditions and culture, religion, and so on. So that seems, I think, when it's phrased that way, that should seem like a moral or a virtuous position to take. I mean, why should my nation be involved in determining what's taking place within a nation on the other side of the world? Why should I force them to be like me? And this is a very old impulse within the Western tradition. It begins in the Bible, in the Old Testament, and throughout Christian history, there's been repeatedly the return to this idea of independent nations as the just thing to do, the moral thing to do.
So when liberal historians say that nationalism is an idea that comes with the 19th century, what is your opinion about that?
Well, first of all, there are quite a few scholars, good academics writing excellent books in the last 20 years who say that this is a myth. Academics have a tendency to construct all of history around a liberal assumption, and the assumption that the nation is an invention of the last 200 years, or that the independent nation is an invention. That assumption, it's a part of a liberal ideology or a Marxist ideology. Those aren't the same things, but both of them are advanced by a theory that says, well, actually, independent nations were just invented recently. If they were just invented recently, we can do without them. Yeah. So that view of nationalism it's almost a kind of a propaganda for dismantling nations. If it was so easy to create them, then we can just uncreate them.
Sweden has existed as a nation for 1,000 years. But in Sweden, a lot of liberal intellectuals, they tend to describe nationalism as based on hatred and a desire of exclusion. What is your opinion on these kind of perspectives?
Well, human beings certainly, by nature, like to form into groups, transmit traditions within those groups, and think of others as strangers. That is inherently human. And the question is, what do we do with that tendency within human nature? So a nationalist will tend to say, look, let's gather together the warring tribes. We'll build a society that will be at peace internally, and we'll defend ourselves externally. The world will have many such nations. Each one will be different from the others, different in religion, laws, traditions, and each one can be an experiment. Right? If one succeeds, then the other nations will look at it and say, oh, look, that looks good, we can imitate it. And if one of them fails, we'll learn that's not a good thing. What's the alternative to doing that? The alternative is we'll come up with some kind of universal ideology, like liberalism or Marxism, and we'll say, no, we know the truth for the whole planet. We know what's right for every nation on the face of the earth. And guess what? People who are Marxists and liberals, they think, well, this makes so much sense that we'll go through a bumpy period and then everyone will accept it. But that's not what happens. We've been watching this experiment for the last 30 years. We've been seeing how Americans and Europeans try to impose their liberalism on Afghanistan, Iraq, Somalia, Bosnia, Serbia, Libya. It just goes on and on.
Yeah.
It creates endless hatred. It creates endless warfare. Better to not say that you know the answer for all of mankind.
Another problem in the Western world, and here in Sweden, is the Christian message of tolerance towards everything that's not me or we. How should people trying to be good Christians think here? Because the idea of a nation implies the idea of making a difference between us and them.
I think that's true. The idea of a nation means that you're different from others. That doesn't require you to hate others. You can have sympathy for others. You can want to help others. But there's a difference between wanting to help others and wanting to eliminate yourself, your own family, your own tribe. And I think that the reason that nations have borders, I mean, this goes all the way back to the Bible. God supposedly gives borders to all of the nations. Why are there borders? The borders exist, we could say, because good borders make good neighbors. Because if you know where you're supposed to stop and your neighbors know where they're supposed to stop, then it's possible to maintain good relations. If you don't know where the border is and your neighbors are constantly coming across your border and confusing themselves, about what they're supposed to do there, that's not a road to peace. That's a road to conflict and war.
But isn't there a tendency, since you're a Bible scholar, isn't there a tendency in the New Testament to propose a sort of utopian goodness, if you can say that?
I'm not sure if this is a fair question. I'm not a scholar of the New Testament.
Okay.
I'm a scholar of the Old Testament.
Okay, I see.
But I should definitely say that the fathers of the Christian Church had the choice of rejecting the Old Testament and keeping only the New.
Yeah.
And they decided that it's a heresy to leave out the Old Testament. So Christians throughout their history have looked to the Old Testament specifically for these kinds of questions. There's the gospel teaching in the New Testament, but the Old Testament teaches about a particular family, which grows into a particular nation, and that nation has borders. It has its own law, different from the laws of the peoples. The Old Testament talks about seeking a relationship between your nation and God, but it doesn't say that the other nations can't have their own relationship. So I think that Christians, I mean, this is something Christians have to decide, is if the Old Testament is a part of the Word of God or part of your tradition as you see it, then you have to come to terms with the fact that the idea of a special land for a special people that's different from the others, that has its own laws and its own traditions and its own independence, that is a part of the Christian tradition.
Yeah. Thank you. Another problem. In some Western countries, conservatives seem to have a problem to define themselves as being nationalists. Why is this?
Well, because they're not really conservative anymore.
Okay.
It's true that that during the 1950s and 1960s, especially in American Britain, but it influenced Europe as well, there was an alliance forged between liberals who were concerned with individual freedoms, as the central thing, and conservatives who are interested in maintaining national and religious traditions. That alliance was called, in America, they called it fusionism. And the fusion was intended to enable a joint liberal and conservative fight against communism. And it worked. It won. That's what defeated the Soviet Union. However, the deal that was made was not so successful. The deal was, we conservatives will be liberal in our public life and will be conservative in our private life. I'm exaggerating a little bit. Roughly that's the deal. And over the last 2 generations, that has eliminated the conservative part of the deal and left only the public liberalism. So many people who call themselves conservatives today, they only care about freedom. They don't care about the nation, and they don't care about tradition. And as far as they're concerned, being conservative just means that that you're conserving liberalism. That is, you're conserving freedom and nothing else. I think we've seen, especially just look at America in 2020, look at Britain. We've seen liberalism collapse into Marxism, into a Marxist cultural revolution with astonishing speed. And what this should teach us is that you eliminate God in Scripture, you eliminate Christianity and Judaism from the public space, and you evacuate it for a religion of nothing but individual liberty. Now, there are good things about it, but here's a bad thing. It lasts 2 generations and then it collapses. We see it right now. If you don't have traditions, and in particular the national and religious traditions of your people that keep the public space balanced and in order, then you don't have freedom either. You lose your freedom very quickly.
Maybe my last question is linked to that, because I wonder what would be, according to you, the most important ingredient in a good nationalism? A common historical or religious identity, or a common citizenship under a common legislation?
I don't think I don't think that you can have a common citizenship if you don't have some kind of a bond that is prior to the citizenship, because citizenship grows out of the willingness of different individuals, but also different tribes, different political parties or factions, the willingness to be loyal to one another. You can't have if there's no loyalty among the different tribes that disagree with one another and sometimes fight with one another, then the nation disintegrates and it ends up being overrun by other nations. The foundation is a mutual loyalty among the different groups, and to have that, there needs to be some substance. So in most nations, it's a common language, but very often it's a common tradition. Sometimes it's a common law that is special to the country. But the most important thing in holding the nation together is that you identify aspects of the history, the language, the traditions that are capable of uniting a majority. And you insist on that. You say, this is who we are, and we're not going to let go of this. Citizenship has to be based on that prior loyalty. If you don't have mutual loyalty, you don't have citizenship. It becomes meaningless. It's just a piece of paper. It doesn't help you in reality.
Okay. Thank you very much, Mr. Hazony, for sharing your time with us.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Och tack så mycket för att ni tittade på Riks.
Hej allihopa och tack så jättemycket för att ni tittar på Riks. Glöm inte att prenumerera på våran kanal genom att trycka på knappen här nedanför. Och om ni vill ha nya notiser om de videos som vi lägger upp, så tryck på ringklockan.